Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I bring you a dark, fascinating, and tragic story at the same time. A story that few really know, that of the young concubines of the Ottoman Empire. The atrocities suffered by the male concubines of the Ottoman Empire. The atrocities suffered by the male concubines of the Ottoman Empire. In the dungeons of the Topkapi Palace, the air was dense, permeated with the metallic smell of freshly spilled blood that not even incense could mask. It was the dawn of March 15th, 1453, and in a windowless room, lit only by flickering torches, a 10-year-old boy screamed until he lost his voice. His hands, tied to a stained marble table, trembled as the imperial surgeon completed his task. It was not a medical operation, but the methodical mutilation that would transform that Christian child from the Balkans into an object at the disposal of Sultan Mehmed II. The blade had cut far more than his flesh. It had severed his future as a man, his identity, his soul. It is said that the body does not lie, and Milos's body, soon to be renamed Suleiman, told the most atrocious story the human mind could conceive. He was no longer a son, no longer Christian, no longer free. What remained was only a living object destined to appease the darkest desires of the most powerful empire in the world. The other children in the room had stopped screaming. Some had fainted from the pain, others had fallen into shock, but they all shared the same fate, being transformed from human beings into luxury goods. The damp stone walls absorbed their cries as if they had been designed for that very purpose. The surgeons worked with the mechanical efficiency of those who had performed the same procedure countless times. In their eyes, they were not children, but raw material to be processed according to the specifications of the imperial harem. To understand how it had come to that, we must return to the green valleys of Serbia, where just 3 months earlier, Milos had been running barefoot through the wheat fields. In reality, it was a human flesh market where the most handsome were selected for far darker fates. Milos's family had heard the rumors. Parents hiding their children in the woods, dressing them as girls, fleeing to distant monasteries. But the empire had eyes in every village, and the tribute had to be paid. When the Sultan's envoys arrived in the winter of 1452, they were not alone. They were escorted by Janissary soldiers and local collaborators who knew every family, every child, every hiding place. They chose Milos for his beauty, for his fair skin so prized in Istanbul. His father tried to bribe the officials with all the money he had. His mother threw herself at the soldiers' feet, begging for mercy. The journey to Istanbul lasted 2 months. Caravans of chained children crossed mountains and valleys, fed with the bare minimum to stay alive. Beaten if they cried, punished if they spoke their mother tongues. Some died along the way, the weakest, the youngest, those who could not endure the forced marches and the cold. Their bodies were abandoned in anonymous ditches to fertilize the earth with the blood of innocents. Milos learned his first lesson. Crying was a luxury he could no longer afford. Survival depended on silence, submission, becoming invisible when possible, and obedient when necessary. Istanbul was a city that smelled of spices, incense, and power. The Topkapi Palace rose over the Bosphorus like a cherished promise, but for the children of the Devshirme, it was a prison disguised as paradise. They arrived at night, while the domes of the mosques stood out against a starry sky that was no longer that of their homeland. They were immediately separated according to criteria that froze the blood. Youthful beauty, delicate features, smooth skin, light eyes. The sturdier and less attractive would go to military schools to become janissaries. The smartest would be trained as administrators. But there was a third group, selected according to specific criteria. These would not serve the empire with the sword or the scroll, they would serve it with their bodies. Milos was sent to the Enderun, the internal school of the harem, but not to the ordinary classes. He was taken to a special section, isolated from the rest by high walls and constant surveillance. There he met 30 other boys who shared his same curse. They had been chosen for the pleasure of the powerful. The first trauma was forced conversion. They were forced to recite the Shahada, the Islamic profession of faith, without understanding the Arabic words they uttered. Their names were changed. Milos became Suleiman. Dmitri was transformed into Ahmed. Alexander was renamed Mustafa. With every name torn away, another piece of their identity vanished forever. Then came the training. They learned to speak fluent Turkish, to read the Quran in Arabic, to perform Islamic ablutions and prayers. They were trained in music, poetry, and dance. They were washed with scented oils, dressed in precious silks, fed with exquisite foods. All this had a sinister purpose. They were being prepared as luxury objects, but the final transformation, the one that would mark them for life, came a few months later. One morning, they were awakened before dawn and taken to that windowless room in the dungeons. There the imperial surgeons awaited, with their sharp knives and blood-soaked bandages. The operation was performed in groups, with methods perfected over the centuries. They used extremely sharp blades for a clean cut. Immediately after, they applied red-hot irons to cauterize the wounds and stop the bleeding. The children who survived the first hours were immersed up to their necks in hot sand to absorb the blood and accelerate healing. The mortality rate was terrifying. Out of every 10 children subjected to the operation, only 3 or 4 survived the first week. Those who did not make it were thrown into the Bosphorus as waste. Suleiman survived. When the fever finally subsided and he managed to sit up without fainting, he discovered that the world had changed. He was no longer a Serbian boy. He was a eunuch, a mutilated body destined to serve the Sultan. His green eyes, once full of life and curiosity, now looked with suspicion and fear. He moved through corridors that smelled of incense and fear, where older concubines warned him never to speak of what they had endured. He had become a living object, perfectly trained in diplomacy, singing and dancing, but incapable of feeling the slightest romantic or sexual emotion. Every memory of his family, his childhood, his Christian identity was replaced by orders, protocols, and imposed religious practices. In the following decades, Suleiman learned to read and write Turkish, Arabic, and Persian perfectly. He became an advisor to some of the most powerful figures of the empire, guarding secrets and intrigues. But no title, no privilege, no wealth could fill the emptiness within him. His soul, broken and mutilated like his body, remained a prisoner of a past no one could erase. From time to time, when the wind carried scents of bread and fresh grass, he felt a shiver of nostalgia for a Serbian village, for a mother who perhaps no longer remembered him, for a father who could not save his son from the fate imposed by the empire. The atrocities suffered by the male concubines of the Ottoman Empire, like those of Suleiman, were not exceptions, but part of a well-structured system of domination and control. The Devshirme, the castrations, the training in imperial harems were instruments of power that transformed children into objects, stripping them of their humanity. Behind every story of wealth and power of the Ottoman Empire lay dozens, hundreds, thousands of broken lives whose silent cries still echo through the centuries, bearing witness to the horror hidden behind the opulence and magnificence of the imperial court. If this story touched you, leave a like, share it with friends curious about history, and write me in the comments what struck you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because there are still many other dark and fascinating stories to discover together. Thank you for staying with me until now, and see you in the next video, ready to explore new secrets of ancient history.